Want to add hip thrust into your routine, but not sure where to start? Stay tuned to learn more. Hey prehabbers, welcome back to the channel. Dr. Adelle here, and today let's talk all things hip thrust. Specifically, why we love the hip thrust and how you can progress to conquering the hip thrust. Why do we love the hip thrust so much? First, it is a great exercise to learn the fundamental movement of a hip hinge. Hip hinges are important to learn for a variety of other lifts like deadlifts, as well as day-to-day activities like picking up boxes, your dogs, your kids, you name it. Think of the hip thrust as a progress bridge, teaching you how to dissociate between your back, your pelvis, and hips through a large range of motion. Second, the hip thrust requires strengthening into max hip extension. And when we think about how often we perform hip extension throughout the day, it's more than you might think. Going from sitting to standing, stepping up a step, bending down to grab something off the ground, and then standing back up, all of these movements require some level of hip extension and posterior chain strengthening and control. Our main hip extensors from an anatomical standpoint include our glute max, the semimembranosus, our semitendinosus, and long head of the biceps femoris. These are our hamstring muscle groups and a portion of our adductor magnus as well. If you are looking to optimize your glute max gains to help with that hip extension, then the hip thrust is an exercise you definitely want to have in your strengthening routine. A systematic review performed in 2020 found that hip thrusts with a barbell demonstrate high levels of EMG glute max activation, 75% to be exact. Barbell hip thrusts have also been shown to translate well to improving sprint speed, especially in athletes that require low driving acceleration. Maybe you're looking at this and want to include the hip thrust in your strengthening routine, but aren't sure where to start because this can definitely be intimidating. But coming from someone who just PR'd on her hip thrust for this exact video, let's walk through a few progressions to get you to your hip thrust personal record. When performing a hip thrust, we want to be in a slight posterior pelvic tilt position at the top of the motion. If we're in an anterior pelvic tilt position, we're going to be more tempted to arch through our low back instead of recruiting our posterior chain, aka our glutes and our hamstrings. So learning to perform the pelvic tilt and gain appropriate control of your pelvic region is the #1 rule of hip thrusts. In order to get that ideal posterior pelvic tilt position, remember 3 things. Keep your chin slightly tucked, looking at the wall in front of you, not the ceiling. Keep your rib cage down. If that rib cage starts to flare and that head starts to tilt back, you're going to be biasing towards more of an anterior pelvic tilt. And third, keep your tailbone tucked and pointed towards the ceiling. Now that we've covered our posterior pelvic tilt, how do we set ourselves up? Finding the right height bench position on your back and foot positioning is important and varies from person to person, so make sure to find a height that suits your height and type of resistance you plan on using. To learn more about how to set up your hip thrust, check out this video here. Okay, now here comes the fun part, hip thrust progressions and variations. Once you've mastered your double leg bodyweight hip thrust, there's so many ways to progress. One of the easiest ways to progress is changing our foot positioning. Stagger your feet about half a foot ahead of one another. In this position, you'll notice that one leg is more bent and that leg will be doing more of the work. Introducing these staggered variations are a great way to bias one leg over the other as well if you tend to compensate. Want to focus on one leg more than the other after an injury, for example, or just looking for more isolated variations. But if you're really looking to isolate one leg over the other, make sure you integrate single leg hip thrusts into your routine. These are also a great warm-up for your heavy lifts, which we'll go into next. Single leg hip thrusts are a great way for targeting your posterior chain unilaterally as well as frontal plane, meaning your glute medius and other pelvic stabilizers and core muscles are working too. With this variation, we are working on stability awareness and core control, which is very important in avoiding compensations as we get into our heavier lifts. Remember, keep your pelvis even and don't let those hips drop. When you're ready to add resistance, there are several ways to do it. You can use a resistance band, a dumbbell, a barbell, and if you're lucky, your gym may even have a dedicated machine for hip thrusts. When you've gotten to the point of adding resistance, finding the right amount of resistance to help you meet your training goals is super important. Remember, your set and rep schemes will differ based on if you're trying to go for power, strength, hypertrophy, or endurance, as well as your tempo. But regardless of your goals, always remember to warm up properly. That means incrementally increasing resistance with an efficient and effective amount of reps. When warming up, make sure you're not loading the bar up too heavy or performing so many reps at the beginning that you're fatigued by the time you get to your working sets. Personally, I prefer 3 warm-up sets of 50%, 75%, and 80 to 90%, while gradually dropping reps in each set. It's a great general guideline for your hip thrust warm-ups. Once warmed up, it's time to get to work. Remember, the hip thrust doesn't have to be an intimidating exercise and should absolutely be added into your routine if you're looking for a functional way to improve your glute strength and hip extension. Understanding your goals, experience with weightlifting, and why you're performing an exercise is key to making gains that make sense to you. So the next time you're in the gym, don't shy away from that hip thrust because your next PR could be right around the corner. Hey prehabbers, if you enjoyed our content, go ahead, like and subscribe.
Or better yet, head over to our website in the description below and check out the dozens of programs that we've created to help you take control of your health today.